Hello, my name is Phillip Gonzales. I'm an instructor here in the Chicano Latin American Studies Department at Fresno State, and I have the pleasure of being here with Joe Cordero. And I'm going to introduce you to Joe and let you hear what he has to say about his background as well as his relationship to Daniel Chano Gonzalez, which is part of Murales de mi tío.
Thank you. Well, I grew up in Chino. That's where I met Chano, and that's where he was known to us. Probably started interacting with him when I was about 15 years old. Prior to that, we knew who he was. What I mean by that is, growing up in the barrio, close-knit community, you get to know different individuals. And Chano was well known because he was an artist. So artists were highly esteemed in our neighborhood, and everybody knew who he was. But when I was about 15 years old in the early 70s, in the height of the Chicano movement, Chano was one of the leaders in the Chicano movement in the Inland Empire, and he kind of took me under his wing. He mentored me, and I had the chance to spend a lot of time with him during that period. Just in terms of how he influenced me, like I said, he was involved in the Chicano movement. He was an activist. He was a muralist, and he inspired us young people to become more socially conscious, more socially aware, and involved in our community, and work towards trying to make positive change in our community. So that was the beginning of where I met Chano, and then I had the opportunity to spend time with him when he was doing some of his murals in Chino.
Joe, do you recall him influencing perhaps how you were as a student? Because you were in high school, you were at Chino High School,
right.
And did he influence you to perhaps do better in education, to pursue education? And why don't you tell us a little bit about that aspect?
Well, if you look back on the 70s were a real interesting time, because there were, in terms of Chicano students, the achievement rate unfortunately was very low at the time. So many of us were not really focused on education, higher education. And to answer your question, Chano came into my life at a time where we started talking about the importance of education, and he would not only speak to us about that, but through his example. Here we have somebody who had a real interesting past. He had of course been in prison, had come out and had straightened his life out, and was attending college. So just by the very nature of him, who was our role model, attending college inspired us. And he would often talk to us about the importance of education in terms of really trying to make social change. So absolutely.
I have to agree with you. When I began a relationship with my tío, one of the things that I saw was this importance of education, and he obviously interacted with my father, who has a college education, and that was instilled in us as his children, that education was important. And then when I knew my uncle, my tío, because I didn't really know about the background of him being in prison at that age. That was kind of kept from at least our family until later on, that it was discovered and revealed when Chano said, well, I was in prison. And I looked at him, no, I didn't know that, tío. And then he proceeded to tell me, what that was about, how he as a young person made mistakes, and how he has learned from that. So
Sure.
you're right, he was a very, very good example for a role model of somebody who overcomes some pretty significant obstacles.
Right. Well, and for us, and could look at it in terms of being unfortunate, but it gave him this incredible credibility with us. That here's a guy that had gone to prison. There's a lot of people that we grew up with that had gone to prison, but had never really, changed their life. But here was an example of somebody that had, and who was just like us. So it had a big influence, not only on me but on others.
I agree. So you mentioned that when I spoke with you earlier this week and told you that this exhibit was here, and you said, "Well, I'm going to come up and see it." So here you are. So I thank you for making that
you're welcome.
trip from San Diego. I know it's a long drive,
Sure.
and but I think you'll agree that this is a very good representation and a tribute to my Theo's work, his art, not only his artwork, but as you mentioned, his statement about things that were going on in the Chicano movement, and his role in trying to change his community in a positive way.
Yeah. Well, it's my honor. Anytime I can do anything to help, I think, keep his legacy alive, I will do, and it is alive. I mean, with the work that you're doing, and the work that I have been able to do in my life. I did pursue higher education, completed undergraduate work at Cal State Fullerton, graduate work at Pepperdine, and coming from the same background as Chano. It's first generation college student, the whole thing. But I owe to some extent my success to Chano and the influence he had on my life. So I'll never forget that, and it just it gives me real pride to know that his work now is being shown in an institution of higher learning where it should be, because his work is not only important in and of itself. The art is obviously just incredible, but the fact that he was doing this work in the 70s to me adds even more significance to what he was doing and what he was trying to do to better our community, because really that's what was motivating him to do the work. It was to try to make social change.
Joe, speaking of social change, there's a little funny story that you shared with me, and it has to do with a pencil drawing that he did. Why don't you tell us that story?
Okay. Yeah, he was one of the founders, amongst a few other individuals. In about 1970, in the barrio of Chino, we established what was then known as a community center known as the Barrio House. And we were inside the Barrio House, and he had his patent pencils, and he was what I thought was like doodling. And he's making a drawing, and at first I really didn't know what it was. So it turns out that it's a revolutionary with an Adelita and their child, and he must have done it in, I don't know, it was less than an hour, maybe a half an hour, and he just peels it off and he says there, and he hands it to the gentleman that was in charge of the Barrio House and says, "Here, let's sell it and make a few dollars for the Barrio House." So being a real admirer of his work, I said, "Well, how much you want for it?" And we worked out a deal, and I bought it, and I still have it, and hopefully someday we could do something with that to have it out in the public.
Tell the rest of the story.
What's that?
About what happened to the money afterwards.
Oh, yes, Yeah, he snatched up the money, which wasn't the first time he was a real interesting character. Okay, real quick, I would tell you another one. We were at this meeting. We were founders, me and my compadre Johnny Vicario, of the high school Mecha in 1970. We go to this community group and say, we're trying to form this Mecha. We need funds. Can you make a donation? So Chano, was the one that actually took us to the meeting, stands up and says, I'm going to be the first one, whips out a $20 bill and puts it on the table. So of course all the other people there felt obligated and they threw money in. So we gather the money, leave, and on the way out he goes, give me that 20 back. He was a struggling artist.
Okay? What? And that was just one of the ways that when I think about my Theo, I think about this character.
Oh, he was exactly,
and, I know that when he was introduced into my life, and first of all, he had very, very dark skin, and of course, my dad introduces and says, "This is your Theo," and I look at my Theo, and I look at my dad, who's very light skinned and dark skin, light skin. I go, okay, you're not going to dispute what your father says to you, and so forth. So. From then on, because my Tio Chano went to my father, who was established, had his family, had a job, knew about proceeding into the college record, and as I mentioned, my father, having already acquired a college education and somebody that was in the education process, was someone that could explain to his brother, who was very motivated to pursue this line. And I think he appreciated the difference that a valid education, college education, was going to mean to him. So.
Well, this one reminded me. He had this painting on canvas of the corn goddess, and I remember we would show it at different exhibits back in the 70s, and what was interesting about that was the painting and the artwork and the beauty of it, spoke for themselves. But the educational aspect, I didn't know there was a corn goddess, and back in the 70s, we didn't have the luxury of the internet, and it was pre-Chicano studies. So he was our Chicano studies professor.
Oh, okay. Well, I know that when I saw this, and Charlie explained his raíces de la cultura chicana, the roots of the Chicano culture, because this was a three-sided parking lot, 1, 2, and then there was a third side, and this ran all through it. So when you're showing students this, and you're saying, this was symbolic, so everything wasn't about the symbolism. There was some beauty with just putting in flowers, different colors, and the idea of there's art within the art, as well as symbols within the art. So I knew he was going to Chaffey College, and then later on I found out he went to Redlands through kind of a unique program that they'd put together. And it was inspiring because I was in college about the same time, and here I had my uncle, who was a little bit older than me, who was asking me about my college education and how I was doing, and telling him the things that I was doing at Long Beach State, and how we were seriously involved with the United Farm Workers, how we were starting this neighborhood school, Escuela de la Raza, and he would like, tell me about that. What are you guys doing? And we started this little food co-op, and he wanted to know all about that. And I said, it's all about teaching the idea that there's a way to work with the system to help people feed themselves, as well as to promote child care within the community and so forth. So a lot of things, again, a little ahead of the times. In terms of the process of organizing, but it was part of the times as well. So I know that when I got the phone call in the morning that I found out that he passed away, as I mentioned earlier when we opened the exhibit, I was a little upset. But then the overriding thought was the murals and the message of the murals need to go to his kids. And that has always been the purpose underneath that. So as you and I were talking earlier about the importance of this being passed on, and thanks to the video documenting, we have that going on, but also that someone else will take the torch, for lack of a better way to say it, and be able to utilize the information that we're discussing here and that we've talked about today, and say, okay, this is the meaning of in the 1970s, and then how that is carried forward into the 2000s.
Well, and it's important because what he was trying to do at the time in terms of educating the community, making social change, motivating us to pursue education, isn't lost. And then I always, not to value his artistic ability, because it's just incredible. His work is incredible, but I just kind of, when I look at his work, I just, that's just an assumption. His work is great. We don't even have to talk about that. I always look at what was behind his work, and behind his work was really trying to make positive change in our community.
Right.
And hopefully by continuing, his legacy in terms of making his artwork available, it'll continue to inspire others, which I think it will. And I think what it'll do is it'll also inspire young people to pursue art, because that was one thing that I know he really, when he did a mural, it was a community mural. You'd have little kids painting. You'd have, senior citizens there helping him. He'd go and find the other, ex-con artist who, didn't do any art anymore. He'd go get them out of their house to come and help them paint the mural. So to him, art was important.
He had some strong meanings in terms of the things that he said. He said, I'd rather, die standing than live on my knees. And I said, so during the Chicano movement, as students were rediscovering their history of Mexico, he became really a figure that stood out because of that saying that he goes, hey, we need to fight for our liberty, for our freedom, for our rights.
Yeah, we didn't have very many role models, this whole notion of, low self-esteem. Well, this was a response to that. And what he would tell us was, we have plenty to be proud of. And by looking at his murals, it shows that. One thing I knew about Chano, and at the time, was that resources were limited in terms of just buying art supplies and the paint, etc. And he was extremely clever and creative, and it didn't surprise me that he would see something, like a gurney,
Army surplus
cots,
stretcher,
medical stretcher, and he would take that and use it as his canvas. One of the things about him that I was incredibly impressed with him about was that, and again, this was not in the age of internet. Communication was basic at the time, telephone. He was at the vanguard, I think, of the Chicano mural movement at the time. He was. But he had connections. He knew people all over the state, for sure. All over the state. And I remember one time we were in East LA after one of the riots, and he got us refuge in some community center there because he knew somebody. This was, late evening. He got us in there and then got us a ride back to Chino from East LA. He was well connected with other, not only community leaders, but artists. And I always found that real interesting. I've never understood how he did that, or how that came about. But he was well known and very well connected.
Joe, I want to thank you again for making the trip to come and see the exhibit, for being a very invaluable resource for me in terms of learning about my tío, and your experiences with him, your relationship with him, but you have added to his legacy by providing that information, enhancing, through your interpretations, through your knowledge, through your experience with him, the meaning and the power of Murales de mi tío.
Well, Phillip, thank you, and you're welcome. But I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, keeping your tío's legacy alive. We talked about the importance of it, but if I could, in closing, say that Chano Gonzalez was a big influence in my life, and what I have the success I've had in my life, whether it's education, my career ended up just retired as a county executive for the county of San Diego. It was Chano that helped me get there. So I'll never forget that. I'll always be indebted to him. And I'd like to close by saying, Chano Gonzalez, presente.